Hi again, everyone. For the Stronger Together podcast, I'm Josh Warden with ACSI. Well, I'm here in Dallas, Texas, recording this right during the 2025 Rooted Educator Worldview Summit. It's been a great week of fellowship and networking. The theme this year was how to establish and build a faith that lasts. These Rooted Educator Summits the last couple of years have been a great way for educators, leaders, administrators to ground themselves in a biblical worldview and to know how to continue encouraging that in their colleagues and, of course, their students. It's just a really important way that ACSI and partnering with the Colson Center is focusing on the biggest fundamentals and how to make sure that our Christian schools are focusing on the right things and teaching in a most effective way. I got a chance to sit down with many of the attendees and have some conversations. We'll hear some of those tidbits over the coming weeks and months on this podcast and elsewhere. Just talking about this conference, the first person we'll hear from right now is Jill Murphy. She's an administrator at Makualani Christian Academy in Hawaii.
Yeah, about a year ago at my school, we were looking at curriculum, and a decision was made to adopt some secular curriculum, and there was a big uproar of families and concern that people had, and I started looking at our teachers and started to think, are our teachers prepared to teach a secular curriculum from a biblical worldview standpoint? And I got a little nervous about it. And so for the past year, I've been looking at ways to train teachers in biblical integration and what that would look like. And I've had a little resistance maybe from some teachers in not wanting to change. And so this conference, when I saw that it was a biblical worldview conference, I was like, I need to be there. And so I just made it a priority to come.
Well, next we'll hear from David Kilgore. He's the head of school at Calvary Christian School in Florida about what he got from the conference and why it was important to be there.
Well, a summit like Rooted is very important for us as Christian school leaders today. We're not just leading academic institutions. We are spiritual formation centers. We live in a culture today that questions truth, who you can trust, and we have the source of truth, God's Word, the Bible. And we need to teach it with clarity and confidence. And a summit like Rooted provides training for educators and administrators to implement the biblical worldview teaching in every area of the school. It doesn't need to just be in the classroom, but in every activity that the school has. That way, you'll be able to train students who are not only followers of Christ, but want to make an impact for Him in this world.
Well, we'll go from Florida to Oregon to hear another attendee's thoughts. Next up is Toby Walker. He's the high school principal at Grace Cascade Christian School in Medford, Oregon.
For me, I had 15 years in public education prior to coming to Christian education, and Christian schools are fundamentally different. We know that, but being at a conference like Rooted just further affirms really what makes us different, what sets us apart, and that's the biblical foundation that we infuse in everything that we do. So coming to Rooted, the goal has been how do we take the unique, significantly different education that Christian schools offer and amplify it and do it better and be more intentional about it.
You heard Toby Walker mention his background in public school, and I've always been fascinated about learning people's lessons, and they do have a public school education background, either themselves as a student or in their own teaching, educating career, especially for educators who may have only been in private school education or Christian school education. What can we learn from those who come from the public sector? And so I asked Toby about that and his lessons from public school and private school and the things that he has blended together, lessons from both.
You know, I think the public school, been a lot of great resources, a lot of great training on meeting the needs of diverse learners. At public school, sometimes we have students who are on IEPs, who have learning disabilities, and students who are scoring 4s and 5s on AP tests. So really a lot of great training on how you scaffold instructional strategies for teachers to meet all those needs. Private schools really focus on the whole child, right? So how do you develop a program, an opportunity, an environment where every kid can flourish, not only academically, but spiritually? So that is a significant difference, and directing kids back to Christ each and every day has been really awesome.
Well, Rooted isn't the only summit in 2025 for ACSI. We've also got the Public Policy and Advocacy Summit. We're still looking forward to that in September in Washington, D.C. Now we'll hear a little bit from Rebecca McLaughlin. She's one of the keynote speakers at that summit. We'll hear some about her background and give you a sense of what you may hear if you join us at the Public Policy and Advocacy Summit in September.
I grew up in the United Kingdom, not a country known for its current Christian education. In fact, though, because of the way that our government relates to education at the state-funded level, we have a lot of Christian schools that are government-funded and that attract all sorts of students from various different backgrounds. So it's a rather different kind of cultural climate that I was raised in. One of the things that was apparent to me as I was growing up in the UK was that Christianity was seen as intellectually bankrupt. I spent a lot of time at highly academic schools, and then went to a very sort of academic secular university, or one that was traditionally Christian but now predominantly secular in Cambridge. And it was not the case that most people had really seriously considered the claims of Christianity and found them to be wanting. It was more that there was an assumption that Christianity had been disproved, whether it was by science or by the behavior of Christians through history, or by the immorality of Christianity in people's minds when it came to present questions surrounding LGBT identities, that people thought then, and many of my contemporaries think now, of Christianity as just not worth looking into. And one of the things I've been passionate about for a few decades at this point, since I was in school myself, is the rediscovery of the Christian faith as an intellectual movement. I think sometimes people make the mistake of assuming that because the gospel is simple and something that a child or somebody with a learning disability could comprehend, that Christianity is by definition anti-intellectual. In actual fact, if we look back over the last 2,000 years of Christian history, Christianity is by any measure the greatest intellectual movement in all of history. Now, today, some Christians will be called to educational environments for themselves or for their children that are explicitly Christian in foundation. Others will be called, like me, into sort of more secular university settings to speak for Christianity in those contexts. But whether we are speaking and serving at Christian schools or in other contexts, the central message boils down to the same thing, that actually not only is Christianity the greatest intellectual movement in all of history, but that many of the assumptions that our most secular friends make about what reality is like, either scientific or ethical, are actually assumptions that are grounded in Christianity. So I'll be talking at the conference about some aspects of this, whether it is the history of science and the way in which Christian belief has actually undergirded science historically and not only been seen as an enemy of scientific discovery, but in fact a propeller of the scientific revolution, or whether we look at the common beliefs that people hold today, however secularly they might identify, about universal human rights and equality, and how these are from the first Christian ideas. And without Christianity today, we have no legitimate way to support them. My sense currently is that people in the broader secular contexts, both in the US and in the UK, where I come from, as I say, think of Christianity as intellectually bankrupt, having a little or nothing to offer, if anything, being a negative and pernicious influence on genuine academic exploration. And there are some legitimate reasons for that, from the ways that Christians are sometimes related to academic pursuits and the ways in which we've sometimes conformed to the stereotypes that are placed upon us. But in reality, when people try to cut Jesus out of the foundation, whether it's for their moral beliefs or even their scientific understanding of the universe, they find that they are throwing out not only the baby and the bathwater, but in fact deconstructing the entire bath.
Well, again, the Public Policy and Advocacy Summit coming up this September in Washington, D.C. Learn more at acsi.org/summit. And for more on the Rooted Educator Worldview Summit, we're doing it again next year in Colorado Springs in June. You can learn more at acsi.org/rooted. Thanks so much for joining us on the Stronger Together podcast. I'm Josh Warden. For all of us at ACSI, thanks for tuning in.